Welcome to tonight's Terror, where you can expect original scary stories. Nothing here is written or narrated by AI. If you enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for visiting, and enjoy the story.
A scream broke the silence of the night, and I sat up in bed, my head turned to the window. I rushed to open the blind. At first, I couldn't see anyone. From this angle, I could see about 2 houses down the street. Then, at the very limit of my vision, in the corner of a neighbor's yard, I saw movement. Then, more screaming. A woman, I couldn't say who, was struggling to separate herself from an animal. The thing had its jaws around her ankle and was shaking back and forth violently. I could see the woman striking at it with her fists and elbow, desperate to make it let go. Finally, another person appeared, running from someplace out of my view. They gave the animal a sharp kick to the ribs. It released the other and scampered away, to where I couldn't see. The 2 people stood talking for a moment. Then they walked away, presumably back to their houses. I stood, shocked and confused by the scene. What was happening in this neighborhood? In the morning, I sat with my parents at the breakfast table, relating the scene I'd witnessed from my window the night before. More exchanges of concerned looks, more doe-eyed pity for the morning sun. I had just asked my dad if he thought it was a coyote that had attacked the woman when the doorbell rang. I watched as my mom opened the front door. A policeman stood on her step, peering in. My dad rushed to join them, and I stood a few feet away listening. After a polite introduction, the officer was suddenly businesslike. "I'm here responding to a complaint from a family in the neighborhood. They allege that your dog attacked a member of their household last night at approximately 11:30 p.m. "I saw it," I said without thinking. All 3 adults turned to look at me. I wilted a bit under their stares, but continued. "I saw the lady getting attacked. Then someone came and chased the dog, or whatever it was, away." "Right," the cop said. "It was a dog. The description seems to match your pet, registered under the name Bug." "Bugs," I corrected. "And he's dead, so it wasn't him." The officer looked surprised and turned to my parents. They both nodded. My mom spoke. "He's telling the truth. We buried him a few days ago. Then well, it doesn't matter, but Bugs isn't the dog you're looking for." "Well," the officer started, "that certainly paints the thing a different color." He thanked my parents and began back to his car. "Coyotes," I said. The cop stopped. He tilted his head up and raised his eyebrows, beckoning me to continue. "I bet it was a coyote. They've been all over this summer. There was one in our yard 2 nights ago. I think," I added. "That seems doubtful in this case, Bud," the cop answered as he opened his car door. "The report says this was definitely a dog. Mean SOB, too. Black, with a blue collar." His door closed, punctuating the end of our exchange. My parents were already in the kitchen again. I stood, watching the police car cruise away and slide quietly over the hill at the end of the street. I spent the rest of the morning shooting hoops in our driveway. The basketball hoop was mounted out front over our garage. I always played barefoot at this time of year. This drove my mom up the wall because the soles of my feet would turn black and mess up our floors. I mostly did it out of laziness, but something about the heat of the blacktop on my feet was invigorating. It kept me hopping around the driveway, chasing rebounds, never staying still too long. When I couldn't take it anymore, I flopped on the grass. I found myself staring across the street into the rows of the cornfield. Are coyotes nocturnal? I wondered suddenly. Probably they were, because I only ever heard them at night. The clouds moved in front of the sun, and I was able to look at the field without squinting. I stared a long time as the tall stalks twitched in the drowsy, humid breeze. My mind kept pulling me back to the events of the past few days. Bug's grave, the paw prints, Mike's phone call, the attack down the street. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to make it all fit together and connect. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't square any of it. Bugs had been old, sure, but he hadn't seemed sick. He still barked at squirrels, jumped in piles of leaves, and played catch with me. And now, the thought that I couldn't remember seeing him after they told me he died gnawed at me. My parents' explanation didn't feel complete anymore. A dark thought crept into my mind, one that I didn't want to entertain but couldn't push away either. What if Bugs wasn't dead? What if my parents had lied? But why would they do that? And where would Bugs be now? I was still looking at the cornfield. That was where I'd seen the coyote, or whatever it was, run into the night. But what if that had been Bugs? The thought chilled me, but also propelled me into action. I put on a pair of my dad's yard work sneakers from the garage and walked cautiously to the edge of the property. The air was thick and humid, the kind that clung to your skin and made you feel like something was touching you all the time. Despite living here all my life, I'd never once wandered onto that farmer's land. Maybe that was a reason it suddenly felt like I was very far from home the moment I stepped into the field. The stalks quickly closed around me like walls, but worse than that, it was like hundreds of little arms were reaching for me, brushing my skin and clothes as I moved. I hated it there immediately. I looked down and saw a mat of broken stalks, pressed down patches of dirt, a path. Something or someone had been through here recently, maybe many times. The farther I went, the louder the field seemed to become. Cicadas chanting ceaselessly, a constant shuffling of the stalks like they were talking to one another. Finally, I broke through into a small clearing, maybe the size of an above-ground swimming pool. I stepped clear of the corn, kicking my feet free of fallen, tangled stalks. The instant I stepped into the clearing, all the sounds of the cornfield ceased. The cicadas cut off their chorus, as if a conductor had signaled the song was done. The wind died out too, and with it, the shush of the cornstalks. Something moved ahead of me, in the rows beyond the clearing. I heard it pushing through the plants at a jog. The movement stopped, and then came a low growl. "Bugs?" I whispered, my voice trembling. I hadn't expected to say his name, but it slipped out before I could stop it. No response, of course, there wouldn't be. Bugs was gone. Had to be. I stared at the spot I thought the sound had come from. The cornstalk shivered, though there was no wind. My breath caught in my throat. "Bugs!" I called again, louder this time. The growl came again, closer now. And then, from the shadows of the corn, a dark shape appeared. It remained mostly hidden by the cornstalks, but it was clearly a dog, dark in color. He, or it, took a step closer, and I stumbled back, nearly falling. "Bugs!" I rasped, my voice cracking. "It's me. It's okay." It felt like I was outside myself, watching this scene. I would never in my life have entertained the idea of a dead dog rising from his grave to haunt my neighborhood. But there I was, trying to talk to this thing. I took a single step forward, and it feigned a lunge as it let out a sharp, warning bark. I turned and ran. Behind me, I could hear him chasing me, the sound of paws pounding the dirt growing louder and louder. The plants smacked my face and shoulders as I tore through the field, but I didn't dare stop. The edge of the field was just ahead. I could see the light in the shape of my house beyond, breaking through the last rows of corn. It was an odd moment to have the thought, but it occurred to me how odd it was for such a scene to be taking place in broad daylight. I burst out onto the road, the sound of the pursuit suddenly gone. When I reached our stoop, I turned, gasping for breath. The stalks swayed gently, but there was no sign of the animal. My mom's voice from behind the screen door nearly made me jump out of my skin. "Having fun?" I was still too out of breath to answer. She glanced down at my feet and added, "You're scrubbing your feet off with the hose before you come in. I saw you playing barefoot basketball." That night, they let me rent movies again. It was the kind of treat I knew was meant to distract me, though I couldn't help but appreciate the effort. By the time we got home, the sun was low, beaming orange light across the cornfield. The afternoon had passed uneventfully. I hadn't told my parents about what happened in the field. That night, I lay in bed, watching the stars on my ceiling dim slowly, as they always did. The silence was heavier than usual. No coyotes, no wind stirring the corn, just stillness. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I woke up suddenly, pulled from sleep by a sound I couldn't place. My room was dark, save for the faint red glow of my clock radio. The sound came again, soft, like the click of claws against wood. I sat up, straining to hear. In the near darkness, I turned my head toward the foot of the bed and froze. There sat Bugs, looking into my eyes with an unreadable expression. But it wasn't quite Bugs. The dog looked like him. Same glossy black fur, same stocky frame. But there was something off. His eyes gleamed so brightly in the darkness, and his body seemed rigid, like he was holding himself upright through sheer force of will. I saw his blue collar, now stained here and there with something dark. His head was cocked to one side, ears pricked forward, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Bugs?" I whispered, my voice trembling. I wanted to move, to get up, to do anything but sit there, frozen and cornered, but I couldn't. Then he moved. His head dipped slowly, and for the first time I noticed there was something on the floor in front of him. A coyote. It was unmistakably dead. Its limp body stretched across the rug. The fur on its neck was matted and dark, and its mouth hung open in a silent snarl. Bugs grasped the coyote's neck in his jaws. He shook it once, hard, his teeth clamping down with a sickening crunch that made me flinch. Satisfied, he dropped it onto the bed beside my feet. I recoiled as the smell of blood and damp fur hit me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Bugs, or whatever this thing was, lifted his head and looked at me again. That expression did not belong to my dog. There was no personality, no love. I could see only something entirely animal in his eyes, something primitive and knowing. For a long moment, We just stared at each other. Then, without a sound, Bugs turned and trotted out of the room. I heard his nails click against the wooden floor as he descended the stairs. I scrambled to my feet, careful not to touch the dead animal at the end of my bed. I reached the front door just in time to see him disappear into the cornfield, his black form swallowed by the shadows and cornstalks. The door was wide open, though I was sure I'd seen my mom lock it before going to bed. I stood a long time looking across the street, waiting for Bugs to come back. I never saw him again. That night, I'd snuck out before sunup and without ceremony tossed the coyote into the woods, well away from the little memorial we'd made for Bugs. I didn't want my parents to know about it. This last encounter was between me and my dog. I watched the cornfield all that summer and most of the fall. Eventually, though, I'd stopped. The way we do as we get older and the tragedies of childhood shrink with time. This all happened so long ago. I'm now 45, and I've never told a soul this story. I'd never expect someone to believe my version of what happened. I think Bugs knew I was scared of the coyotes, and he wanted to protect me. I think he did die that humid July night. I think my dad buried him while I watched. I think Bugs came back.